There's plenty for us to discuss and to talk about it all. I am joined in studio by our senior Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, as well as international affairs analyst Dan Perry, also the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us on the rundown this evening. Dan, I want to begin with you because we are seeing more and more of these efforts to increase humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, but we're also seeing more and more of this international criticism continue to pile up against Israel. Is Israel doing enough? What more should Israel be doing? Or is this international pressure likely just going to continue no matter what Israel does?
I think Israel should basically tell the world community that they'll let in whatever aid the world community wishes go in, if it's food and medicine, basically. Israel should not be in the business of calibrating aid and deciding how much is enough. And, you know, there are 2 million people in Gaza. And if you're going to really feed them enough, as much as you or I would want to have access to, that's obviously way, way, way more than what's getting in. Even if all the trucks that are currently being held up were all allowed to go straight in, and even if they cease troubling themselves with the question of whether Hamas commandeers the aid or not, it's obviously very little. And the world has, I fear, run out of excuses. And whether it was because of a picture that was a sick boy and not a starving boy, doesn't even matter, because I know people in Gaza who are subsisting off 1 potato shared per day. And even the people who have the money to buy enough food to live decently, you know, there's not enough of it even on the black market. So the situation is terrible, and Israel should basically completely get out of the way. And until they do, I fear that they will continue to absorb this criticism. And it doesn't help when you have ministers like Ben-Gvir, who over the weekend again called for a halt of all humanitarian aid. So to be clear, the idea of purposely creating malnutrition in blockaded territory is a war crime under the 4th Geneva Convention. I don't know if Ben-Gvir is unaware of this, but you cannot be promoting this idea that Israel should be turning down the aid to achieve a purpose, even if that purpose is one that almost any rational person on earth would agree with, which is to weaken Hamas. You cannot do it this way. And too many statements by Israeli cabinet ministers and former generals have pointed in the other direction. And too often has it seemed credibly that Israel is withholding aid for some reason or other. And I've said this many times, you cannot do that. That is not a legitimate tactic of war in the eyes of the world community. You can say we don't care about the world community, but then you better be a very, very self-sufficient country.
Dan Perry, when it comes to how a plan like this to annex parts of the Gaza Strip, how this could be perceived in the international community and possible pushback. Some say that a plan like this could open the floodgates for more and more people to then want to recognize a Palestinian state. Could this have the counter effect that Israel would hope for?
Absolutely. Not only could, it definitely would. When you take an action, you have to, you know, map out before what you're going to gain and what you're going to lose. Israel already controls all kinds of territory the Palestinians claim without annexing it. There's a reason why Israel hasn't annexed the West Bank, and that's because if it becomes part of Israel's territory by law, it has to give citizenship to the millions of Palestinians who live there, and that would cease to be a Jewish state. So what, now they're going to annex little bits of Gaza in order to frighten Hamas? There was a theory about Hamas and the Israeli government, one of many, many idiotic theories, that they suffice with Gaza and they would never risk losing control of Gaza because they so love ruling Gaza. And the people who believed this, which was the entire government basically, and thought Hamas was therefore deterred from offensive action, were very surprised on October 7th when Hamas risked all of Gaza and was very happy to have Gaza predictably be almost flattened as a consequence of what they did, because Gaza is not what they want. What they want is for Israel to come under tremendous global pressure to the verging on delegitimization and isolation. And that is precisely what Israel's inching towards if it goes ahead and gives Hamas what they want, which is for Israel to try to take away, steal officially little bits of a territory that is already way, way, way too small for 2 million people. No one in the world will recognize that annexation. Israel will be able to do not very much with it. The little annexed bits of Gaza will become targets for terrorism. Soldiers will be killed defending it. And all this will happen with the world basically agreeing that the people attacking the soldiers on those areas have a legitimate point. So this is a very, very idiotic plan. Yeah. The bigger plan, the real plan of the far right in Israel is to annex all of Gaza. To annex Gaza and not give the people their citizenship, because they can't have 2 million more Palestinians, because they really do believe that they can be compelled to somehow leave and magically vanish. And of course, they've been given a turbocharge in their reverie by Donald Trump, who now and then actually aligns with that vision.
Ariel, we're talking about annexing Gaza. Something else that is thrown out often is some sort of a military occupation of the Gaza Strip. Can you just break down the difference between these two?
Yeah, I think specifically with regards to this issue, the word annexation is being misused by the people who are pushing the story, because annexation means imposing state law on that territory. This hasn't happened in Gush Etzion in the West Bank, and it will happen in Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun. I am not so sure about that. Ultimately, what Israel's threatening here is prolonged military occupation of military rule over that area, not imposing Israeli state law, not transferring the local Israeli population and reestablishing settlements. That is not on the table right now and is not feasible. We have to be very specific with regards to the terminology, and I think the use of the word annexation is a test balloon for public.
A very important clarification.
They could try to annex a strip of currently depopulated land by pushing the Gaza border, let's say, a kilometer inward. And, they might think that threatens Hamas in some way. What it really will do is bring the weight of global condemnation on Israel.
Everyone has about a minute and a half to get to their safe place. We are staying on air in studio, and with me in studio as well is still international affairs analyst Dan Perry. Dan, as we wait for more information about the most recent attack from the Houthis in Yemen, this is at least an indication that they are continuing their attacks on Israel, which they continue to vow to do, at least until Israel stops its war in Gaza. Is this still a threat that Israel has yet to truly tackle, it seems?
Clearly, Israel has failed to deter the Houthis from doing this, and it was somewhat betrayed by the U.S., because the U.S. And allies did start to attack the Houthis in a way that was more serious and more or less succeeded in extracting from the Houthis agreement not to attack merchant ships heading up to the Suez Canal, but they forgot to demand that the Houthis also stop attacking Israel. Israel itself has taken action against the port of Hodeidah, against the airport, against some installations in Sana'a. Clearly, it hasn't been enough to deter them. The challenge, as always, with these terrorist groups is that they don't care how much damage you inflict upon them or their population. They're, in many cases, basically hijacked population composed largely of innocents. So it's a very, very big challenge. I think Israel has priced in that as long as the war goes on in Gaza, there will be occasional missile launches from Yemen. Outrageous as it is, I'm not observing decisive action to put an end to it, which I would frankly favor. I just can't.
But some argue that there are bigger threats that the IDF has to focus on, that being closer to its borders rather than these once every few days missiles that we see launched from Yemen.
Bigger threats, but you can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can't imagine that there's a very good argument for allowing us to go on, except maybe that Israel wants to spare the civilian population of Yemen, because to really go after the Houthis would involve a lot of collateral damage, because as with the other terrorists who've taken over countries or parts of countries, they're embedded within the civilian population. And let's suppose you completely take out the port of Hodeidah, but completely. That would obviously cause great harm to the ability of Yemen, a country where already there is great malnutrition and all kinds of medical problems and cholera epidemic, to give services to the people. So it's quite a pickle, and Israel has tried to sort of optimize its reaction to all this by striking at the Houthis, but not so much that they end up killing civilians.
It's a line that they're walking militarily, show that you're responding to these missile launches and drone launches, might I add, but not cause possibly too much damage to the civilian population.
The equation is different than in Gaza, where obviously they have not been reluctant to cause damage to civilian infrastructure.
And we are hearing now that that one missile that was fired from Yemen, it was successfully intercepted. At this time, we have no reports of any damage caused or any civilians injured as well. But once again, a sign that the Houthis are not stopping in their desire to target the state of Israel. But the Israeli air defense systems are strong, and they continue to shoot those down. Right before we were talking about this, Dan, I want to come back to the other news that is happening around the world. Even amidst all of these other threats against the state of Israel, there's also a lot of diplomatic threats. And more of these countries, Western countries, are joining France. Now, the UK is jumping off of France and stating September, this is the deadline for Israel to wrap up the war in Gaza. And if not, we're going to move forward with recognizing a Palestinian state. What does this all mean in actuality? The fact that the UK is now following suit.
I fear it means that they may harm the cause of establishing a Palestinian state. Macron seemed pretty resolute. It sounds to me like he's going to do it. The UK, trying to be clever and maintain leverage, is establishing demands of Hamas and conditions upon Israel, most of which probably will not be met. And so in September, they're going to probably have to conclude that none of their demands and conditions were met. And reading between the lines of what he said today, implicitly that means, yes, Starmer will join Macron and the UK will recognize Palestine. I think that would be a terrible mistake. And I say that as someone who has for decades thought that Israel needs to partition from the Palestinians, whether that's in the context of a Palestinian state or some other solution. Israel cannot control the entire land between the river and the sea without ceasing to be a Jewish state, because there are 15 million people in this territory, half of whom are Jews, and the other half are Arabs. And that is a difficult choice Israel has to make. And I favor partition, but after October 7th, Israelis are in no mood to repeat the Gaza experiment in the West Bank that is much more strategic, much closer to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, surrounds Jerusalem on three sides. If there's even the shadow of a sliver of a hint of a doubt that Hamas might take over that territory as well, they're just not going to do it. They won't do that even if the result is total global isolation and economic sanctions. They just won't. And they probably shouldn't, because they can't take that risk. And so nothing must be done to strengthen the position of Hamas, but nothing. If you strengthen Hamas, you almost guarantee that Israel will not take the risks necessary to establish a Palestinian state, or even just to end the occupation of
And these statements, would you say they are strengthening Hamas? Because this is what the foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, has said as well when it comes to the current ceasefire efforts in Gaza.
He's right. Just like a broken clock who's right twice a day, Gideon Sa'ar was right. Because the narrative that says, look, Hamas had to do October 7th because this is what finally got the world to wake up to Palestinians' plight and to the justice of the Palestinian state, that narrative will have legs. So there's two ways to end this war, with Hamas totally delegitimized and compelled by the Arab world and by Palestinian opinion to not only hand over the keys of Gaza to an alternative, which probably has to be the Palestinian Authority, but also to disarm. Now, Israel, if it conducted itself wiser about the end game to the war, instead of blundering into a forever insurgency in Gaza, probably could achieve this, in my view, with the help of the entire Arab world. Instead of that outcome, by Israel's prolonging the war to the point that the entire globe is outraged enough that they may do this very foolish thing that Starmer and Macron are threatening to do, that will strengthen Hamas. Their support, instead of going down from whatever it is right now in the Palestinian street, let's say 40% to 55%, depending on how you define support, it could go down to 10 tomorrow if the reconstruction of Gaza were conditioned on disarmament. And Israel just ended the war and gave the Palestinians that choice. Disarm Hamas, else there will not be a reconstruction of Gaza, and yeah, we will let you leave if you want. That's one scenario, and if Hamas resists their support would go down to 10% or less. If this happens, with the war continuing and Israel clinging to its current strategy, support for Hamas will shoot to 70% because they will be seen as the force that, through the device of barbarism and heinous terrorism, yes, achieved Western recognition of a Palestinian state. This is terrible, and it should be viewed by Israel as a diplomatic emergency, basically.
International affairs analyst Dan Perry, great to hear your analysis on everything that's happening as always. Thank you.